Hi everyone. I'm in my happy place, Mackin Park, Mackin Park in Millardville, the Millardville neighborhood of Coquitlam, British Columbia. Millardville is a francophone neighborhood that was settled in the 1920s by Quebecers hoping to work in the sawmills here along the Fraser River. All the streets have beautiful francophone names, and it's in the city, the Canadian or the British Columbia city of Coquitlam, which is an Indigenous word, which means, as I understand it, the people who smell like fish. The Coquitlam people were fishers, and they were so good at it, they would hire themselves out to clean and prepare fish to other indigenous tribes. So it's a francophone neighborhood in a city with an indigenous name. So I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy to recover from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Kierans, be locked up by the British Columbia BC New Democratic Party government, David Eby, self-appointed leader. They locked him up when I found out that they had created a secret, fraudulent and forged power of attorney over Paul on February 1st of 2021 to give Paul, who was 64 with Down syndrome, the COVID-19 vaccine against the wishes of another sister that I have who lives here in BC. So the BC government and my brother's group home, L'Arche, appointed my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in North Bay, Ontario, who's never lived with Paul, who left home when he was born, who's 16 years older than him, and who doesn't understand his communication or speech, and who had only met him a few times, by her own admission, as his guardian. This was to thwart the wishes of my anti-vaccine sister who lives on Vancouver Island. I'm the last surviving family member from a huge family of 9 kids. I'm the 8th and Paul is 9. Was the 9th. So I've been posting these videos as a way of expressing my feelings about watching my little brother be killed by my sister. He had, I now understand the facts to be that he had some kind of brain incident at the group home. He might have fallen. He had a gash on his head that was oozing blood. They wouldn't tell me anything about his medical condition whatsoever because the evil nun had been appointed or self-appointed guardian. And she only allowed me a 10-minute visit per day at Burnaby Hospital. I waited in the lobby for 10 to 12 hours every day for the 10 days before he died. So Paul was locked up by the BC New Democratic Party with no visitors for 588 days before he had this brain incident. And then I found out while I was waiting in the lobby of the Burnaby Hospital, I found out that the Burnaby RCMP had been ordered to reopen an investigation into this secret, fraudulent, and forged power of attorney over my little brother. I got a phone call from a staff sergeant there, and he said I could expect a letter confirming that. And when I got the letter, I could see that it was dated a month earlier. So I had worked my way through the British Columbia courts trying to set aside the termination of my visits with Paul, or twice weekly visits, and then to try and set aside the appointment of the evil nun as Paul's committee. I wasn't successful, but what I found out after the decision of the BC Court of Appeal, I got this call about a month later saying that the RCMP had been ordered by their civilian oversight agency to reopen the investigation into the secret, fraudulent, and forged power of attorney over my brother. And I was so excited. I thought, oh God, this means that I've got a chance, that somebody's listening to me. I went into court the next morning and I didn't get on before a judge. There wasn't enough time. And the nun has had at all times 2 law firms working for her, one in Ottawa. She's got a lawyer, Charles Gibson, who acts on behalf of pedophile priests across Canada. All across Canada. He's your go-to guy if you're a pedophile priest and you've harmed children or others in your care and you're a member of the Catholic Church clergy. So that's who she had acting for her, together with Singleton Urquhart, the firm Singleton Urquhart in Vancouver. Casey Dean Shaw was this young scoundrel, I guess that's the only way I can put it, was acting for her. I estimate that the Catholic Church spent $500,000 at least on defending my sister's right to have a secret, fraudulent, and forged power of attorney over a man with whom she's only met a few times in his life, and after taking all the vows that nuns take to walk away from their families and to not be married or have children. Anyways, so what's come up over what happened was Paul had some kind of brain incident on April 13th. They didn't tell me until April 14th. They wanted to see if he would die first, die alone. But he didn't die. He didn't die. Paul was one tough character, a wonderful, wonderful person. And so I found out on April 15th I was allowed a 10-minute visit per day by the evil nun who had flown in from Ontario. The fat, old, evil nun. And she got him put in a room where it was only her and him in this room, which was, I'm sure, is not legal by all Catholic standards. But anyways, so when she found out that I knew the RCMP had been ordered to reopen the investigation into her fraudulent forged power of attorney, she ordered Paul to be, what I believe, in my opinion, from what I could see, Paul was recovering. He was struggling to recover, or he should have been allowed to die with dignity. He had, when I first saw him, he had an oxygen mask on, and he had intravenous and a catheter. But he sat up in bed. He grabbed my hand so hard when I said my name. He wouldn't let my hand go. He just squeezed it. He grabbed a book from my hand, a huge, big coffee table book about movie stars, and turned the pages perfectly. He looked at me. So he was struggling to recover. But when the evil nun found out that the investigation into her fraudulent and forged power of attorney had been ordered to be reopened, he had to die. He had to die. And so when I saw him, after I had told the judge about this document, I went back to the hospital room. His oxygen mask had been removed, and he looked to be sedated to death to me. There was no reason to sedate him at all. He was not in pain, and his respiratory system, his fragile little respiratory system and heart couldn't handle being sedated and having the oxygen mask removed. So I watched helplessly as my little brother, who my whole life my goal has been to protect him and guard him from institutions and from institutional abuse, as my parents did. My father was told when he was born to place him in Smith Falls, a huge institution for mentally handicapped children. And my dad said, hell no. And he brought him home. As soon as Paul was able to come home, my dad went down to Toronto from Sudbury and took the train home and brought Paul home himself. And my mother created a little preschool for handicapped children. for the neighborhood handicapped children, because there was no education system or any supports whatsoever for disabled children at that time in the 50s and 60s in Sudbury. So I knew it was my job. Some people don't understand disabled people, or some people hate disabled people. And I watched my sister order Dr. Michael Baker, the treating physician at Burnaby Hospital. He took me aside, and I knew he wanted to say, Paul's dying. And I just said to him, I don't want to hear what you've got to say, and he better bloody well be alive on Monday morning when I was going in front of the judge. But he had that glint in his eye. This doctor had a glint in there. There's people, Stephen King, the mystery writer, said, murder is like potato chips. You can't stop with just one. And now that Canada has legalized the murder of disabled people who do not need to be dying, and they don't need to have a reasonably foreseeable death, all they need to be is ill or disabled, and the government will put them down like a dog, this Canadian government. So that's what I watched being done helplessly. I watched my brother being sedated to death, and I went to the nurse, although they wouldn't talk to me at all, because the evil nun had the piece of paper that said she was the one in charge. And I went to the charge nurse and I said, I think he's being over-sedated. And the charge nurse said, I'll make my own observations. So I'm just trying to relay over and over and over again my observations. And I was trained as a psychologist. I worked in that building right over there for 4 years with children with behavioral disabilities. And then I worked for 3 years for the government of British Columbia with incapable adults. So my observations were that my brother was struggling to recover. When the nun found out that I knew she was being investigated, all of my brother's, Paul's, medical supports were removed, and he was sedated to death with some kind of opioid, I believe hydromorphone, which he didn't need medically. The purpose of giving him the hydromorphone was to kill him. So what's come up in the news, which is more catastrophic than people realize and faster than people realize, is that Donald Trump has said that he wants to annex Canada and have Justin Trudeau, the architect of medical assistance in dying in Canada. 60,000 Canadians have been killed by regular doctors and nurses in Canada since Justin Trudeau took power on October 19th, 2015. And I try to post videos every day on YouTube about it. And my YouTube channel with all of my little grandma type videos was vaporized. People want to be able to kill disabled people in Canada. And what this has done, the euthanasia in Canada is unlike any, it's the worst in the world. 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is caused by a regular doctor or nurse administering a lethal injection. Canada kills more than 20 people a day this way. And they, as I said, since Justin Trudeau, I call him Justin Castro, he's illegitimate in every way that a leader can be illegitimate, including he's the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro of Cuba, socialist, anarchist, asshole. 60,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians have been killed. And you might say, oh, well, it's a compassionate thing to do, to put them down, if they're suffering. It may be compassionate. It may be what they want, but we don't have the right to do it. And there's a darn good reason why human beings have not killed their innocent, vulnerable, and ill neighbors for 50,000 years. We've always been able to do it. And there's always been a very good reason. Society cannot withstand this kind of treatment. So what's happened now is that Trump has said he wants to annex Canada, like, we're another hotel that wants to buy, go into, he wants to buy. And I warned everyone that this would be the result of medical assistance in dying, of euthanasia, this euthanasia plan, because the other countries think if Canada cannot even hold off killing its own vulnerable, disabled citizens, it doesn't deserve to be a sovereign nation. They don't do this in England. They don't do this there's a very few places like Switzerland and Netherlands with nutty white people that does this. But most places in the world understand the sanctity of human life and how quickly the social fabric is going to break down, as it has done. And so now we've got Donald Trump on our doorstep out of the blue, with a mandate at the Supreme Court of the United States, in the United States Senate and the United States Congress. He's got a mandate, and he wants to overtake our country. And now we have to try and stand up and say, why we have our own identity, why we're a sovereign nation. I have written Pierre Poilievre. I've said, what is your stance on euthanasia? Are you going to stop it, this medical assistance in dying, killing, the murder of disabled, vulnerable people? Are you going to stop it? And he said, oh no, I'm not going to change a thing. That's the thing about governments. Once they get their hands on power, governments want to kill you. What they want is they ultimately want is all the power and all the money in the world, and for you not to be around at all. Just like a landlord. Landlords would prefer that they get your rent, but that you're not around to inconvenience them. Governments are exactly the same way. They would prefer that they have all the power and money, all your money and power, and that you're not around to annoy them. So the first thing that Pierre Poilievre needs to do is to roll back this stain on Canada's identity, on Canada's sovereignty, this killing of innocent, vulnerable people. If we can't afford to care for them, if we can't afford the medical care or whatever, then we don't deserve, Haiti doesn't use that as an excuse. Haiti has far less resources than we have. African countries have far less resources than we have. And they don't use that as an excuse to kill 20 people a day by lethal injection. And recent studies have shown that it's not a painless death. It's akin to drowning. And even if it was a painless death, we don't have a right to do it. And there hasn't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been one. You can't appeal the decision to kill you because you're dead. So if people would have changed their minds, we have no way of knowing because they're gone. So we've brought our own, the sovereignty of our wonderful, the nation that around the world was admired by everyone. We had standing, we were wealthy, and we've just fallen into disrepute, the most horrific disrepute, like Germany. Before this was, as I've said repeatedly, this was exactly what Hitler did before World War II. Is he cleared out all the hospitals and sanatoriums. He killed by lethal injection or gassed every single vulnerable disabled person. 350,000 before World War II even started. And people thought, oh well, it kind of makes sense. He called them useless mouths. My brother's life had value. He was an honorable, hardworking person who touched the lives, who lifted everyone up, who came into contact with him. He was not a useless mouth. I'm legally a disabled person. I'm not a useless mouth. I've raised 2 children. I've got 4 grandchildren. I've worked hard my whole life. And it isn't an option. Killing people isn't an option. There's a red line, and we cannot go beyond it. Anyways, that's it for now. Thank you for listening. Take care, everybody.